back in May, around the 5th of May, I posted a video of a guitar kit that I purchased from DIYguitarkits.net. And you can go back and check out that video if you're interested in seeing the kit in its original form when I received it. I did an unboxing video. So the idea was to build this 335 kit from scratch, which I've never actually done before. And today I wanted to give you a little update on how the project is proceeding. Now, I've built many Strats from parts before. A kit from scratch is a little bit different and a little bit more challenging. And today we're going to be talking about some of the hurdles that I've encountered when doing the work on this guitar thus far. So when you receive the kit, it's basically in parts. This is a glued in neck design like the original 335s. It's not a bolt-on neck. So the body and the neck come in the kit separately, and you have to glue them together and then do all the actual finishing on the body. And there's definitely a certain skill required to do that, to be able to do a good job. Now, in its present form, this is not finished. It's not even, I would say, it's getting close to being halfway there in terms of the finish on the body, but there's still a lot of work to do. Red. You know, I think red is the color for a 335, and I really like that color, so I decided to stick with that. Some of the challenges that I had with this build is that I didn't have all of the materials required. Because we're in lockdown, quarantine, I had to make do with what I had. I actually was running low on the red dye, so I had to order a little bit more, which took a little bit more time for me to get it. But I actually ended up getting it, so that's great. So let me run you through the steps involved with getting the guitar to this point. So the first thing you need to do is to sand the body in its raw format. So once you have the body, before you put any stain or anything on it, you want to wet it down, raise the grain, and then sand it back with, 240 grit sandpaper, something dense enough to knock off the grain that is raised. But you don't want to gouge the wood. You want to go rather lightly. Do this 3 or 4 times so that you get all of the, the pieces of wood in the grain that are kind of not set down properly, that raise up easy. You want to knock that off. Okay, that's step number 1. Step number 2 in the process is that you want to put down whatever stain you want to start off with. So what I did was I put down black stain, and I'm using leather dyes for this. When I say stains, I'm actually talking about a dye. It's dyes that are designed to stain leather, and they work very well on wood also. So that's what I ended up doing. So I got some leather dyes, stained the entire body and neck totally pitch black, and then sanded it back. And that I did to basically accentuate whatever grain is in the maple. Now, maple, this particular top had a little bit of figuring in it, but it wasn't extremely figured, so it didn't really pop as much as I wanted it to, but it still made a difference, and you can still see it when it's going to be sanded down to a gloss. I think you're going to really like what it looks like. So I did that for the neck and the body. Sanded that completely down. When I say completely down, is you only want a little bit of the black dye left in the areas where you want the grain to pop. So ideally in the flames, okay? So I stopped at that point, got that really nice, and then I applied my first coats of sanding sealer. Now, the sanding sealer that I used was in a can, and I regret going that route. I normally use sanding sealer in a spray can, and I highly recommend that you go that route if you can, just because it's way easier to manage. If you don't have a very clean environment, you're going to probably end up getting dusts and hair and little bits of sanding in there, which is a pain to get out afterwards. The sanding sealer in a spray can, to me, is better in the sense that it applies much more evenly. The only issue is that when you do a spray can sanding sealer, you have to go with a lot more coats because the actual individual coats are a lot thinner. So with the sanding sealer, I'm gonna say I added about 3 or 4 coats to the sanding sealer before I did anything else to it. Once the sanding sealer was down, I just lightly sanded it so I can get out any bumps, you know, major defects that I can see out of the body and the neck. And the sanding sealer basically locks in the black dye, and then you can sand it without necessarily worrying too much about going through the dye finish. Although it seems like it'll protect it, it won't protect it 100%. So when you're sanding it back, be very careful of the edges of the guitar, because the edges tend to be a lot thinner. And I did go through in a couple of areas and I had to touch that up with more dye and a paintbrush just to go over those areas. And then I added a bit more sanding sealer, and then I continued the process. So sometimes you will get issues like that. You'll notice that I have tissue inside the holes here. I put tissue in there so when I spray the body, I don't get a whole bunch of gunk in there, and it just protects it a little bit better. Okay. I also masked down the fretboard. You'll see here that everything's masked down so you can actually see the rosewood fretboard. That's basically because I don't want to have any paint or any kind of finish or sanding sealer in that area. So it's well protected. So once I did that, the next step was I actually took the neck and started to stain it red. So I added the red stain to the entire body and neck, and I did a few coats of that till I got it dark enough. What I felt was that the red was a little bit too red, so I added a little bit of yellow stain to it to give it a little bit more of a vintage vibe. And even with that, I felt that it still was a little bit too red. So after adding a few coats of the dye to the front, the back, and the neck, I ended up taking an amber spray and spraying the entire body, which is also a lacquer spray, with the amber. I did the amber spray after doing a few coats of clear lacquer. So I basically put the red dye on the body. I applied the clear lacquer. I did probably about 5 or 6 coats of clear lacquer. And then on top of that, I applied the amber. So I gave it more of a vintage vibe. And I probably will end up doing a little bit more of the amber before I am done, okay? So after that point, I didn't do any sanding in between coats because I didn't want to mess with it. That's one of the things that I think a lot of people make mistakes with. They end up getting a hair or a piece of dust in it, and their temptation is to go in there and take it out with your finger or sand it down. I would say avoid doing that. Get the finish with the lacquer thick enough. I would say I bought 2 cans of lacquer, and I'm gonna apply all 2 cans before I'm done. So I'm gonna apply all of the lacquer and then flat sand it. Okay, so anything that gets stuck in there, I'm not gonna touch it right away. I'm gonna make sure the finish is built up enough, because spray lacquer is very, very thin. So if you start messing with it, you have a good chance of going through the lacquer and disturbing the dye underneath, and that's the last thing you want to do. So when you have binding on a guitar like this, you have to take care of that. Some people will try to mask that off with tape and then spray everything and take the tape off. You can go that route, but that is probably a little bit more work than it's actually worth, because when you peel off the tape, you're always going to get an edge that's not perfect. If you want to get that perfect edge, you really have to do some scraping. And this is the first time I actually scraped binding on a project like this, and I have a whole new respect for people that do that all day long in these companies where they build guitars like this. What you need to do is you have to take some kind of a blade. I decided to take a utility knife blade, and basically you have to take it and with a very steady hand just pull it across the binding and make sure that you're right on that line so that you don't go into the wood, and basically clean off all of the lacquer and dye that's on the binding front and back. Now if you're not careful and you've never done that before, you can actually scrape right through the wood finish, which is a real pain because then you have some touch-up work to do. But if you take it slowly and with a very steady hand go through it, you probably will end up doing a great job. I'm not actually finished. There's still some binding that needs to be sanded and scraped here along the neck areas, and I have some cleanup work to do. But overall, I'm pretty happy of the job that I did, considering it was the first time that I actually did this. So that's really cool. Once the binding is cleaned off perfectly, you can continue applying the lacquer. And then I would say keep on applying the lacquer till you have no more lacquer left and it's thick enough. And you want it to dry at least, I would say, give it a day for every coat of lacquer you put on there. So if you put 10 coats, give it 10 days. If you put on more lacquer, give it a little bit longer, just because you want that lacquer to cure properly and to become nice and hard before you actually start level sanding it, because if not, you're gonna have problems. Other than that, the main issues, I guess, are really the sanding. When you get to this point, the level sanding is very important. So I haven't gotten to that point yet, but when I get to the level sanding stage, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some steel wool, probably start with double O, maybe even just O, and just lightly just scuff the surface a little bit, just to take off anything that you can feel with your hands. If there's any bumps, little hairs or dust or anything like that, you want that to be gone, okay? And you want the finish to be pretty much dull. You don't want it to be shiny, okay? And then once you get it to that point, I would say apply another couple of coats of lacquer as finish coats, very light coats. You don't want to introduce any more dust or hair or anything at that point. Make sure your environment is super clean. And then apply a couple of coats of lacquer, let that dry. Then you're going to start sanding with wet dry sandpaper. So you take some wet dry sandpaper with a drop of dish soap and you start sanding, okay? And I basically would probably start at about 800. If you go 600, maybe very lightly with 600, 800, all the way up to whatever grit you can get. The highest grit, 2000 maybe. And after 2000, I would then buff it with some buffing compound that you can get from your auto parts store and a buffing wheel. And I do that manually most of the time because I don't have any tools. So I'll do that till it becomes a mirror finish. Once the actual guitar has a beautiful reflective mirror finish, you're pretty much done. And at that point, you can start building the guitar, putting in the bridge, the bridge, the pickups, the electronics, everything that needs to go onto the guitar. And hopefully be very careful so that you don't ding or mar the finish that you worked so hard to actually get so shiny and beautiful. In this guitar, you'll notice the headstock is also dyed red. Normally with like a 335, the headstock is actually black. I haven't really decided whether or not I want to do a black headstock. I think I would prefer to keep it just red. I'll probably make some kind of a logo to go under there, and what I'll do is I'll actually put more layers of lacquer on it so that it actually finishes it up and I can actually sand it down and finish all of that up really nicely. Now the hardware that came with this kit was gold, and I would prefer not to use gold hardware, but that's what I have. So unless I decide to change all of the hardware, I'll probably stick with gold. I felt that having a little bit more amber in the color would actually go a lot better with the gold color in actual fact. So if I do stick with gold, I do have some pickups that are from a Tokai Black Beauty that I originally got a while ago that I took out. They actually sound pretty good, and I thought that that would be a nice set to actually put in here and maybe use those. But I haven't really decided about the hardware yet, so we'll see. If it comes out really nice and, you know, I feel that it's a keeper, I will definitely invest in some better hardware and some better electronics than the ones that come with the kit originally. That's usually the weak point with these kits. But if you just want to kick around guitar and you don't want to put more money into the project, then the hardware that comes with it will do you for a while. You can always upgrade that later. So if you have any ideas about what I can put on the headstock, I don't want to put a Gibson logo or anything like that because it's not a Gibson guitar. I want to personalize it. If you have any ideas about the headstock, let me know and I'll see if I can get someone to make me a nice decal to go on the headstock, sort of in the style of Gibson, but not really a Gibson one. And that's basically it. So I just wanted to give you a little view a little taste of how the project is coming along so that you can be inspired if you're considering building a guitar like this for yourself. This is basically what you can expect from it. You know, it's a lot of work, but it's very satisfying. At the end of it, you end up with something that is your own, and if it plays nice and is set up nice, it could be a keeper for a really long time. So that about wraps up this episode of Addicted to Gear. I just wanted to give you a quick update on the project. If you guys are considering building one of these, or maybe you're already working on one yourself and you need some advice or you want to bounce some ideas off of me, just leave your comments down below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. If you want to subscribe to the channel because you find this information valuable, then please hit the little subscribe button or hit the little bell icon to be notified whenever I post new stuff on the channel. If you want to help the channel out, please help yourself to whatever swag is available. You can get some cups, t-shirts, stickers, whatever you guys fancy, and the proceeds of that also go into helping the channel continue to function. So that's it for now, guys. Thank you for tuning in. There'll be more great stuff coming your way right here on Addicted to Gear. See you soon.